Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Oh, did I come too far north? Let me try it again. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
All right. I'm used to a crowd with a little bit call and response. So it's good to be here with the McMaster family and here at your university. I want to thank you all for allowing me a few moments to share some lessons, some stories of folks from across both the United States and across the planet, to talk a little bit about policy, to also talk about artists, which I know some of my friends who I was having a conversation with earlier are always interested in. What's Rihanna doing? What's Beyonce doing? What's a number of other folks doing in relationship to addressing climate change and environmental injustice? And we're also going to, talk about the pathway forward. What are those things that each and every one of us can do? How do we inspire our governments to do more? And these slides are just going to actually move as I go forward. But I thought that we would start with this one, where Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, and it should say every woman's needs, of course, but not every man's greed, because greed has played a role in some of the dynamics that we have seen. I would be remiss in the movement that I come out with if I don't make sure that we understand the true history of how we got here, about how policies have played a role, both in bringing African slaves and enslaving them in North America, South America, Central America, the islands, how we've also understand policy played a role with our indigenous brothers and sisters, both in the United States and here in Canada, and how we began to set up a set of dynamics that made people in sacrifice zones, vulnerable communities. We also understand that in the United States, folks tried to strip away rights from women. They couldn't own land. You couldn't vote. All of this is tied into moving power away from folks. The civil rights movement in the United States, which will be critical in our conversation, has also played a very important role. And then when we're talking about the environmental movement, of course, what happened in the late 60s and the early 70s began to place a platform of some of the things we're working on now for environmental justice. This is the flashpoint of the environmental justice movement in Warren County, North Carolina, where people literally laid down in the roads to stop cancer-causing chemicals from coming into their communities. We understand that our voice has power, and often we are the unseen folks who are playing a critical role in helping to make change happen. So I wanted to bring forward all the amazing women who are in the environmental justice movement across Central America, North America, and a number of other locations. But also into our conversation, we also have to talk about how our most vulnerable communities are being disproportionately impacted. And you see a child there who's dealing with a number of the different dynamics that are going on. James Baldwin, one of the great writers in the United States, said that if I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see. Far too often in our countries, when it comes to vulnerable communities, we don't see what's actually going on. I want y'all to do me a favor. Everybody take in a deep breath. Hold on to it for a second. Now let it out. I don't need anybody passing out. I want you to think about something. In the United States, over 200,000 people die prematurely from air pollution every year. In this country, it's about 15,000 people, based upon the studies that I've seen, are folks who are losing their lives. The 48217 was a community that you saw. In that community in Detroit, right across the bridge from Windsor, you have folks who literally, when they open up their windows, when children look out the windows, instead of seeing trees like when I was walking around this campus, you actually have folks who are looking at the stacks and the pollution that's coming out. You saw that statistic there that 7 million folks in the United States, 7 million kids are dealing with the impacts that are happening from asthma. I want to also just share with you that when we're talking about air pollution, in places like Wilmington, California, which is known as the diesel death zone, you have all of these different types of impacts that are happening. There's an interesting statistic that more people are dying from air pollution in the United States than are dying from car crashes. More people are dying from air pollution than are dying from gun violence. More people are dying from air pollution than are dying from the overdoses of drugs. And we all know how critically important those issues are. Many of us have worked on those issues as well. And that is the dynamic that's going on. Of course, that same pollution that is making black and brown, indigenous, Asian and Pacific Islander and lower wealth white communities sick is the same pollution that is also playing a significant role in driving our climate crisis. If we understand that, then we understand also the work that we still have to do in this moment. These slides are just going to go, and I want you to see the imagery as I'm sharing some things with you. You know, when we also understand the impacts that are happening from air pollution, then we have to ask the question, if we know that we're losing this many people's lives, how is it that we continue to move down this road? A part of it is policy. And I know that there are many students who are here. There are many of our elders who are also in the room who have worked diligently over the decades to be able to make sure that the right types of policies are in place so that these impacts that are happening, that we can minimize them and hopefully eventually begin to stop these types of things from happening. But we also understand that there are a number of dynamics that are happening in this space. We have big corporations who are making significant amount of money and don't want to let that go. We know that there is mining that is happening. And we also understand that our transportation processes that are in place have also played a significant role in what's going on. I want to bring some things full circle for everyone, because in the United States, policy has often been driven by, one, money, and also by whom are the individuals whom we can place these types of things, coal-fired power plants, right? Petrochemical corporations, whose communities would that best be suited for? So let me ask you guys a question. By a show of hands, raise your right hand if you would like to have a coal-fired power plant in your backyard. Please raise your hand. Everybody look around. Nobody wants that coal-fired power plant. Okay. How many folks would like to have a petrochemical facility in your community? Raise your hand. Everybody, please look around. So nobody's hands are going up. Whose communities do they usually end up in? Anyone want to take a guess? Someone said black communities. Go ahead, sister. Low income. Who else? Brother over here. Low socioeconomic communities. What's your name, brother? Dylan. Dylan said low socioeconomic communities. Who else? Yes, sir. Native communities. Yes. And again, part of this is tied to policy of whom is sacrificable and who isn't. Let me ask a question, because I want to go deeper tonight with everyone. Has anybody in the room, just raise either hand, right or left, if you've ever seen a coal-fired power plant in a wealthy community? Yes, he has. One person. What community is that, sir? Oh, in India. Yes. Yes. There it is. In Canada. Anybody seen it in a wealthy community? Because it doesn't exist. Or at least I haven't seen it. I've actually worked in over 1,000 communities across the United States and internationally. I have not yet seen it. That does not mean it doesn't exist, because I have not been in every community. So if we understand that there are these types of dynamics that are going on, then we also understand that it is also tied to the civic process, to democracy, to voting, which sometimes we separate the two. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. But I want to also anchor, before we move, a little more about air pollution, because we were having an interesting conversation just about a half an hour ago. So I want you to understand there are two sets of dynamics, and there may be more. So one side is the public health impact side. Gandhi talked a lot about both sustainability and also about the mind, the body, and the spirit, which is incredibly important, and understanding these impacts that sometimes go on that we just don't make the connections. So air pollution is tied to cancers. So you may have heard people talk about cancer clusters, and you'll find places And I encourage you, sometimes folks get upset. I would love for you to pull out your phones, to use your computers, to Google the things that I share, because you should not just trust what the person in front of the room is saying, you should actually validate it for yourself. I want you to look up an area called Cancer Alley. Cancer Alley is a really interesting place. It runs between New Orleans and Baton Rouge in the United States, an area that was founded by freed slaves, and they began to build a community there. And what happened is that you have a number of petrochemical facilities that moved into this area, and now they have some of the highest cancer rates in North America. You should look it up, because you'll also see some other dynamics that are going on in that space. You will find people whom, inside of their community, wealth has been extracted, because when I asked you all that question of who would love to have a coal-fired power plant, who would love to have a petrochemical facility in your community, no one raised their hands. But this community, even though they have done everything right, have been dumped on. And for as far as the eye can see, you will see petrochemical facilities. So not just talking about one, but talking about a multitude, over 150 petrochemical facilities with a toxic loading that's going on into their bodies. Why? Because folks felt that they could be sacrificed. Why should you care about that? All the way up here in Hamilton. Well, what's coming out of those facilities and those stacks plays a significant role in the climate crisis and what's happening. So even though that's happening way over there, it still has impacts of the things that are going on here. I want you to look at another community, because we could say, well, that's just an anomaly, Mustafa. It's just a one-off. I want you to look at the Manchester community in Houston, Texas. Has anybody in the room ever been to Houston? A couple folks. Have you ever been to the Manchester community in Houston, Texas? Wasn't on your tourist stop there, was it? Manchester community, hardworking Latinx community. Folks doing everything right, getting up, going to work. When you go to the Manchester community, there's this interesting dynamic, and I'm so glad that you all don't have to experience this. When you go to the Manchester community and you roll down the windows in your car, you feel like you're breathing in gasoline fumes because they're so surrounded. Now, let me see if anybody in this room has to deal with this dynamic, because you never know. Everybody have, how many folks in the room, by show of hands, have a front yard or a backyard? Raise your hand. So that's the majority of folks who are in the room. I want you to imagine this. If you are in your backyard or your front yard, and you can reach out your arm. Everybody just reach out either your right hand or your left hand as far as you can go. Now, in the Manchester community in Houston, Texas, if you're standing in some folks' backyard, or on occasion, people's front yard, they can literally reach out and almost touch the piping in these facilities. You saw a picture go by of Cesar Chavez High School. Now, all of you have been blessed to be at this great institution of learning. I want you to imagine if you grew up in the Manchester community in Houston, Texas, on the ship channel, and you had to breathe in these types of toxic fumes, would you have made it to this institution? Maybe. But there are a number of students, when you saw that picture of the track, and in the background there was the flaring that was going on, that's what those kids have to deal with each and every day. And because they are taking in those types of chemicals, they are dealing with all kinds of different public health impacts that are happening. And that's the reason we have to pay attention, because the dynamics that sometimes are not just happening in our community can have huge impacts across the planet. You know, lots of times wealthier people will sometimes feel that's, the thing that happens on the other side of the tracks. That's not really my concern, but they don't realize that pollution actually doesn't just stay in one location. It actually migrates. It actually moves. And once again, As I will reinforce this as we have our conversation and our engagement tonight, it's tied to the climate crisis as well. You know, I was having a conversation earlier, and I was reminded of an area here in Canada called the Chemical Valley. Now, sometimes when I think about Canada and all the engagements I've had here, you know, many of the places are just beautiful, especially if you've come from certain areas where there's been lots and lots of impacts and you see a number of different types of things that are going on. But even here, there are a number of different impacts and challenges that are happening. Let me ask a question by a show of hands. In the last 24 hours, and I have to be careful because I'm on a college campus, how many folks have had a beverage? Raise your right hand. Or a drink of water. All right. Yeah, now y'all understand what I'm saying. You saw the some of the pictures. How many folks know what happened in Flint, Michigan? By a show of hands. Great. Sister in the burgundy, what happened in Flint, Michigan? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So she said their water was contaminated, and for a long time there were some impacts that happened. Anybody else want to expand on that? Who else raised their hand? Yes, sir.
Wasn't the problem there was a lead crisis, like in the water supply?
Yes.
And many politicians continuously said, no, we're gonna fix this problem. It's gonna happen, and I think in some communities it's still an issue. Like they still have to buy bottled water, but largely the problem has been fixed after 20 years. So it was a pretty crazy amount of time where they continually had to buy bottled water and they couldn't drink. Water wasn't free there anymore.
Yeah, yeah. What's your name?
Tynan?
Tynan?
Yeah.
You want a microphone? You want to give the rest of it?
No.
No, I say that because you are exactly right. Not because. So it's interesting. You know, Flint, Michigan is just one example. There are over 3,000 locations across the United States that has higher levels of lead in its water than they did in Flint, Michigan, just as the important information that my brother just shared. And once again, we have to understand, how many folks know what the impacts from lead looks like? Yes, in the back row. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So you can have neurological disorders, right? Lowering of IQ points. Imagine once again you're trying to navigate in the educational system and you have been impacted from what you drank. Has anybody in the room ever known somebody who's dealt with lead poisoning? So Canada is really blessed that it doesn't have the same level of lead poisoning as some other countries do. But it's also really interesting that we have Flint, Michigan, which is, on this side of the state. And if you just go a little distance to the other side of the state, there's a place called Benton Harbor, Michigan. I want y'all to look that up. Benton Harbor, Michigan. Benton Harbor, Michigan actually has higher levels of lead in its water than Flint did. So the kids who live there are going to have an extremely difficult time in being able to navigate all the things you have to do, all the medical interventions that are necessary, and a number of these other dynamics that play out. In Baltimore, Maryland, there was a young man by the name of Freddie Gray. Some of you may remember that name. Both he and his sister were lead poisoned. Freddie Gray also was killed by the police. And there were a number of different things that played out in relationship to that. And if we have time, we will unpack that. I share these types of examples with you because when we're dealing with the climate crisis, both air and water issues will be exacerbated because of these extra stressors that will be placed on our system. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the strategies to be able to address that. But it's not just lead. You all have seen, if you turn on the news and you look across what's happening across our planet, we now have significant droughts that are happening. And we understand that as fresh water begins to shrink, there are going to be a number of different dynamics that are going to play out in that space. And Gandhi continued to remind us about being good caretakers of our planet and of our resources. And that requires that each and every one of us is a part of that process. Because when we don't, we see all kinds of dynamics that will play out, that if we got ahead of the curve, that we could actually address them. You know, it's interesting that when we don't break our addiction to fossil fuels and move forward with a just transition, just transition means that no one gets left behind, that we are moving toward this new clean economy, then we begin to pit people against each other. Folks will say, well, if we move forward on addressing the climate crisis, then our economies will weaken, that our economies will crash. If we have strong environmental protection, then we also hear those types of things. But yet when we look throughout history for those who are economic majors, we will see that economies continue to grow and grow and grow. Each year that we had, strong or stronger environmental laws in place. But when we don't, we begin to see folks falling through the cracks, if you will. And now we find in this moment that we turn on the television and what we see are wildfires burning across Canada, across the western United States. And we understand that that puts more air pollution into the air. We also understand when deforestation is happening, that it is also playing a role in the warming up of our planet and some of these dynamics and the floods that we see going on. Or we also see, when we don't begin to move away from fossil fuels, we also see the hurricanes that unfortunately, have not only hit Puerto Rico and Florida in this moment, but also Eastern Canada. And we see folks who are in pain. We see the trauma that is also associated with dealing with the climate crisis. But the beauty of the moment is that we can actually do something about it, that we can actually begin to make the steps that are necessary. I was having a conversation earlier with my good friend, and we were talking about a number of the artists who are actually stepping up and helping to play a significant role and helping to make change happen. And we were going through a whole list of folks, and that's why in the beginning we were talking about Rihanna and the investments that she's making. I should check what audience I'm in. How many folks know who Rihanna is? Raise your hand. Okay, because you never know. There's a few folks that do not have their hands up. So after the lecture, I want y'all to come over, and I want y'all to help them to understand who that artist is. But she's making significant investments. How many folks know who Beyonce is? All right, let's see. Did any more hands go up? Let me look again so I do it right. Hang on one second. How many folks know who Beyonce is? Okay, so everybody knows Beyonce. So I was blessed to be able to do some work when I was at the Hip Hop Caucus with a number of amazing artists. I really appreciate Beyonce because she continues to give back. When Hurricane Harvey came through, she was one of the first who was able to step up and to make sure, that she was utilizing her platform to help make change happen, but not stopping there, because sometimes we expect artists, just to do a PSA, but actually making real investments and creating and helping to, sort of support organizations and foundations, which is important. How many folks know who Fat Joe is? I'm gonna see how many hip hop heads we have in the room. Okay, just a few more. How about Pitbull? Anybody know who Pitbull is? Okay, wait, all these Pitbull fans, okay. I know he'll be excited about that. It's interesting that both Fat Joe, for those of you who are from New York or know New York hip hop, where Fat Joe is from, and then of course everybody knows Pitbull, them also utilizing their platform and getting engaged in helping to rebuild parts of Puerto Rico, because we've seen lots of times the government resources sometimes move a bit slower. So artists and entertainers getting into the space really helps a lot. I think there was a photo in there of both of them. I can't remember if it's still there or not. But we have all these amazing artists who are getting, let me see how far some of you guys go back. How many folks know who Common is? So only a few folks. So y'all might just want to check out Common. What I appreciate about Common is not only is he a phenomenal rapper and actor, but he's also an activist. He did a video when I was with the Hip Hop Caucus called Trouble in the Water, because he wanted to make sure that we were putting a spotlight on what was happening, both in Flint and a number of other locations, but at the same time, also beginning to talk about the solutions to make sure that vulnerable communities were no longer in the position that they did. If you all get a chance later on or whenever, just check out that video. You're probably on YouTube. You can go see Trouble in the Water. There's a number of other artists who are part of it. I bring those folks into our conversation because it is going to take each and every one of us to be able to address what's happening both around environmental injustices, but also around the climate crisis. I want to ask a question from everybody. By a show of hands, how many folks in this room know that you have a blessing? If you know you have a blessing, raise your hand. Raise it higher. I want everybody to look around, because in many times we kind of feel like we're alone, and sometimes we kind of feel like we don't have anything to contribute to making change happen. Everybody has a different blessing, right? Some folks' blessing is that you are a great writer. Some folks' blessing is that you could be a great singer. Some people's blessing is that you're great with numbers. There are all kinds of different blessings. When we talk about this type of work with frontline communities, because the reality of the situation is that communities speak for themselves. And many times we want to be able to give, partner, contribute, and we have to, one, be willing to share power, but we also have to be willing to know what our blessing is and how that can help to contribute into making change happen. And that's why it's important to know what your blessing is. So I'm going to do something here real quick. I'm thinking everybody is close enough to somebody. So what I want you to do is look to the person to your left or your right, depending on where you are. Everybody just look across, make sure somebody's close by. If somebody's not close by, like you got somebody behind you, so I see you, brother. I want you to just whisper to that person what your blessing is. It's a little different, right? You're like, Mustafa, where are you going with this? That's all right. So just whisper to the person to your left or your right what your blessing is. You look like my little sister, which is a great thing. She's amazing. And you're here by yourself.
I'm whispering.
You're whispering to you? Okay. That's all right. We got some people whispering to themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. You're okay. All right. Did everybody share? Okay. So you're only supposed to share with just that one person, whomever you chose. Now, I want you to share that blessing with the person who is on your other side. So I'll give you 30 seconds. All right, I see people running around sharing blessings. All right, so let me ask another question. How many folks in the room are an athlete? How many folks are an athlete? All right. We got some athletes here. Where else are the athletes? We got some athletes over there. We got athletes here. What sport do you brothers play?
Golf. Hockey. Does it count? Hockey.
Golf counts, yes. Basketball, okay. I saw some more. Over here, yes. Soccer. What else do we have? Basketball, okay. Yes, sir. Cross country, okay. I did that a long time ago. What else? I saw one more set of folks. So, yes. Mm-hmm. Swimming, okay. So I want to bring this into the conversation because there are a couple of different dynamics that are here. One, for those folks who are athletes, except for those who play golf. And I love golf. Golf takes a lot of skill, so no shade.
It's a mental game.
It is a mental game. Yes, it is. Athletics require, one, they require focus. Would that be true? But they also require, in many instances, folks finding a way to come together, right? To be able to achieve whatever that goal is. When we think about the work that we have to do to address the climate crisis, that means that an example would be that we need folks who can focus like the folks who play golf. And they need the strategy, right?
100%, yeah.
He said 100%. Not 99%, 100%. We also know that folks who play basketball or other team sports, that you got to find a way to be able to balance out all the different, somebody wants to be the guard, somebody wants to be the center, somebody wants to run a certain play, but we find ways to make it work to be able to hopefully win the game, right? And we know that in all these different types of things where we have to find a way to be able to come together to address whatever the sets of challenges are. And the interesting thing is, going back to when we look at the types of things that are going on, when we see, that we've gone by 2050, I believe it is, that we may end up having more pieces of plastic in our oceans and our water bodies than we do fish, then that means that we've got to find a way to be able to come together. That means that we have to find a way to be able to find our sets of commonalities. I want to bring one thing into our conversation, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about solutions that I think is important, and that is the 17 principles of environmental justice. Now, I'm going to ask this question, and it's okay if nobody raises their hand. How many people have ever read the 17 principles of environmental justice? How many people in the room feel that you are an environmentalist or you work on environmental issues or climate issues? Raise your hand. So we have a few folks. That's interesting. I'll prove to you all once again that you are environmentalists. In the last, I'm going to give you a little bit longer time frame. In the last 2 minutes, how many folks in the room have taken a breath of air? Raise your right hand. Find the non-air breathers. Everybody look around. So every person in this room raised their hand. Okay. How many folks in the last 48 hours have taken a drink of water? Raise your hand. Or some other type of libation. So it looks like every person in this room has almost raised their hand except for one person. He's never breathed. He's never drank any water. Is that right? Okay, I got you. So sometimes we get it twisted. We think that being an environmentalist, that working on climate issues means that, we have to be out protecting trees, which is a good thing, but that doesn't necessarily make you an environmentalist. You see, we often disconnect what's happening in everyday people's lives from the climate crisis, from working on environmental issues. If you think back to the work of Gandhi, it wasn't about separating people. It was actually about finding ways to bring people together. What were those commonalities? What was our humanity about? And that's what this work is about also. It's about not everyone is going to line up on every one of the issues, but we're all in this together. It's interesting. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that we come to these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. When you think about the climate crisis, we are most definitely all in the same boat. When you think about the impacts that are happening because of injustice and racism and a number of things that have played a role, it impacts all of us. Some of us it impacts in a more direct way, but there are ripples effects for everything that goes on. And that's why finding solutions are so incredibly important. And that's why I appreciate so many young people who are actually leading the charge. When you look at those early slides that I shared with you, when you look at the women's movement, a lot of the folks who were a part of that were younger people. When you look at the civil rights movement, although you see Dr. King, and he was a young man at that time, it was youth who were being and playing a huge role. When you look at the early environmental movement and the picture that went by, those were young people. And now, young people are most definitely taking the lead on a number of these issues that are going on. We're moving forward on all the things that you see in the clean economy. You know, and I like this picture that's there, and that is Bridge Tech. These are young kids who come from very challenged background, but when they go through this program, they know how to build androids, they know how to build windmills, they know the full array of solar, and when they finish this program that's led by Jimmy Moore, they actually have the same level of education as a first-year MIT student. And these are kids who come from, you know, very challenged backgrounds. That's one of the ways that we begin to win on the climate crisis. The other way that we win is by getting engaged in the political process in whatever form or fashion that you see fit, and making sure that we have the right types of candidates that are there. The other way is making sure that we are also positioning ourselves on these new sets of opportunities that are out there. And we'll go deeper into that whenever we have, you know, the opportunity here for some Q&A. And of course, the other thing that's critically important is our own sets of personal responsibility and how our blessings can be utilized to help to make positive change happen. I want you all to, as I close out, my grandmother has this saying. She says that you have power unless you give it away. Think about that for a second. How easily we give away our power to be able to make change happen. Because sometimes we'll say, you know what, I'm too young. Nobody's going to listen to me. Or I don't come from a certain community that maybe has privilege. Nobody's going to listen to me. Or that's not my problem. I don't live there. I don't have those types of impacts. So we give our power away. Everybody do me a favor. Look to the person to your left. I see some folks don't like the person on your left, so look to the person on your right. Reach your left hand out to the person on your left-hand side. Reach your right hand out to the person on your right-hand side. If your neighbor does not know their left from their right, help them out. Okay. All right. You should have washed your hands before you came here. Everybody got somebody on your left and your right? All right. Now I want to bring back a lesson that Gandhi shared with us that you might not be aware of. You know, it is about actually connecting with our own humanity. And often in our society, we put these barriers up between each other, which allows us to have misinformation take root. It allows us to believe all kinds of things about each other, which is not true. So grab the hand of the person on your left-hand side. We're going to change this dynamic, even if you don't like that person. Grab the hand of the person on your right-hand side, if you can. Okay, looks like most folks can do it. Now everybody stand up. Let's see how. Y'all don't like each other? It's okay, Dean. There you go. All right. So it's interesting that I did this experiment one time. Maybe you all have seen this. Have you ever got into an elevator? You don't know anybody on the elevator, and you automatically look at those little lights that are there, hoping nobody would ever talk to you? Just me? I'm the only one? So you all get in the elevator and you just start talking away. Is that right? We've got these things that are built into us where, we just separate ourselves from each other. We have to find ways to begin to reconnect with our humanity. We were in COVID for quite a while, looking at screens, and in many instances, we missed our friends. We were disconnected from each other. And now we have this moment of being able to reconnect. And in this reconnecting, we can bring that power, that set of focus into addressing many of the challenges that are in front of us. And that's why this is really important. When my grandmother says that if we give to giving our power away. So I want you all, and I'm not sure what's going to happen in Canada, but we're about to find out. How many folks in the room believe that you have power? So we got, all right, we got a few folks. Did anybody teach you about power in elementary school? No, one person did. How about junior high school? Some folks went to a good school in junior high school. How about high school? Nope. How about at McMaster University? All right, there you go. So let's find out. I've done this all over the world. I speak 4 languages. The 5th one, I'm not that good. Everybody say power. Power. That was just horrible. All right, let's try it again. Everyone say power. Power. That's getting a little better. All right. 3rd time, let's do this. Everybody put your right hand in the air. Oh, it's going to get good to you now. I see y'all starting to shake. I see some of the folks. This time, say power to the people. Power to the people. Try it again. Power to the people. Power to the people. One last time, say power to the people. Power to the people. All right, so we're going to take that energy. We're actually going to focus on helping to make real change happen. I'm Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. I want to thank y'all for a couple minutes of your time.